Hello, everybody, and surprise! I bet no one was expecting this, mainly because I didn't put it in the schedule. As I said in the last stream, I'm a bit pressed for time, and I'm not going to be streaming next week for one reason or the other. So, in order to keep everybody happy, or rather get all of this stuff off my plate, which I said and I'm quite happy to do, I'm streaming at a slightly different time in order to get this out there. It'll sit in Twitch for a little while and then it'll move on to YouTube. And from that point of view, it'll get recorded and people can watch it as and when. I'm not too worried if there aren't as many people here now. In fact, even if there are any, because of that. And this stream is to specifically look at a request that was made by Michael Dance, who's a newish player. And also, hopefully later on today, I'm going to have a look at a couple of his decks and stuff like that. But I'm going to do this first, which was, as you may see on the screen, a request or a question about the card Overrun. And he says, I have a question for the old guard. Why don't I see more use of the Overrun mission? I don't see it appear in any of the championship decks. I find it to be such a useful mission to get a jump on mech advantage. And possibly swing a game from one stockpile or a mech or whatever else. Maybe I'm giving the card a little too much credit, and he's asking for an opinion. So I'm going to do that. That's the plan for this stream. So I suppose the first thing we should really do is actually go and look at the card itself. So if I can highlight this and let's get rid of that. Let's get that out of the way for the moment, and we can look at this card. And as you can see on this left-hand side, here is the Overrun card itself. It says, play only when blocked. After this mission, if all blocking units were scrapped, when damage was resolved, untap each attacking unit. So it's a very, very offensive mission. You attack, and if they block, if everything on their side dies, you get to untap and have a go again. And that is, it's very, very powerful. And therefore, I suppose the question is, why isn't this run more and more often by more and more people? And the answer is actually, it relies on a couple of things. It relies on you attacking. And therefore, from that point of view, you do not have any flexibility with this card. You must attack. Whereas if you look at a card, for instance, like, let's go find it. I'll pull one out. Let's go for pushing the envelope. And as you can see here, it doesn't matter whether you're attacking or whether you're defending. It says one of your units gets +3 attack and takes 3 damage. So you can use that offensively. Arguably, it's an offensive card. You can do it when you can use it when you're attacking, or you can use it when you're defending. Whereas if we go back to our wonderful Overrun, it's an attack-only card, and that's quite limiting. So there's no flexibility in there. And the second major issue is you have to scrap all opposing units. Now, in some cases, that can be made very, very easy for you because your opponent speed bumps or chump blocks, as it's often called. And I'll explain what that is in a second. But basically, it's a sacrifice. And if they sacrifice a unit to stop you, you can use this card. And in that context, it's actually quite powerful. So if we look at the board that I've just had a bit of a play around and set up here, over on the right-hand side, I've put a tactics card for each side. You can see those here. And that means tactics is in play for each player. I haven't bothered with the resources and the assets and all that kind of stuff. We don't need them. The only reason to show that tactics is in play is that there is a +1 initiative on both sides and mission cards can be played. Rest of the resources are out of it. I have 2 cards on the left, as you can see here, these black ones. These represent the various stockpiles. One for this player over here and one for the player down the bottom here. And I've just organised it like a good on 2-on-2, 1 versus 1 type game with 2 players. And I also thought, while we're here, we'll have a bit of fun with the league units. So I've put in the Locust, with its little 1 cost, 103. And I've also put in the Rifleman. Let's just change that so we can get... Unfortunately, some of these images are slightly different sizes. Okay, and we can see from the Rifleman, it's a 2 cost slow unit. It's a 171, overheat 3+3, alpha strike 1, and he's got this anti-aircraft thing. Just a small comment here. I'm not sure about the white border around here. It looks nice on the screen here, but it doesn't look so good on the actual play field. There's a white border around it, and I'm not sure about that. So this is our, for argument's sake of explaining what chump blocking is or speed bumping, and how Overrun is very powerful in those contexts. Our defending player with 1 slow, the Rifleman, and 1 fast unit, the Locust. On our attacking side, we have a Hankyu Prime, which is a 143 jump ECM. And we have a Grendel C, which is a 162 Alpha 1 jump anti-missile unit. And attached to the Grendel C, we have a very underrated, often missed, quite nasty card in this context, and arguably only this context, which is Inferno Missile Retrofit. And just for the sake of what's going on here, I'm going to explain what this card does. This card does a number of things. First of all, it gives the unit it's applied to AP, which means that will do an additional damage against targets such as the stockpile or the command post. It doesn't do anything additional to mechs. But in this case, this card does an additional damage equal to double of the overheat option of the mech that's engaged in battle. So what this does is, when you look at the Rifleman, which has an overheat of 3+3, if the mech with Inferno Missile Retrofit on it is damaged by the Rifleman, it takes double the option. And what that means is it takes double the overheat amount. So not the bonus attack, the overheat amount. So in this case, it's going to get 6, which is pretty hefty for this Rifleman because it's a 1-7. So it only needs 2 more damage and it's going to die. And yes, I've set this up purposely so this Rifleman is going to get obliterated by this Grendel C because it's got 2 damage on it. Okay. So there are a couple of ways that this scenario could play out. What I'm going to suggest is very, very simply that the clan player decides to attack the stockpile with the Hankyu Prime here, potentially doing 3 damage, and the Inner Sphere player blocks because the Hankyu is a fast unit. The only fast unit on the Inner Sphere side is this Locust, and it blocks with the Locust, which we will just tap, and says, I'm not playing any missions. I will deal 1 damage to your Hankyu Prime. This is a total sacrifice to prevent 3 damage. Okay. The 1 damage from the Locust hits the ECM of the Hankyu Prime. Yeah, I know ECM doesn't do that in the tabletop, but it's the card game. It's a simulation. It's not perfect. And the weird noise in the background is my phone going off with somebody I don't know. So I'm just going to ignore that for the moment. So that's going to bounce off the Hankyu, and the Hankyu is going to deal 3 damage back. Okay? But the Inner Sphere player plays an Overrun, which, as we've said, play when you're blocked. The Hankyu has been blocked by the Locust. And after the mission, if all the blocking units are scrapped, you untap. Here we go. This Locust is taking 3 damage from the Hankyu Prime. It's dying horribly. So by playing the Overrun mission, we can actually untap our Hankyu Prime. And if we really want to give his stockpile some grief, I'll just move the Locust out of the way because it's been scrapped. If I put it in the bin, I've only got to get it out again in a few minutes. So I'll just put it over there. And then the Hankyu Prime can go and tap and go and hit the stockpile for 3 again. Okay. So that's the premise of the card. Providing you scrap all of the blocking units, then bang, you untap and go again. Okay. And that, as I've said, it's quite powerful. It works really well. but it has its drawbacks, as we've said. So let's look at another potential scenario. And what we'll do here is we'll just untap a few things. And we will put a sharpshooter onto this rifleman. Okay, so the sharpshooter says whenever the mech piloted by sharpshooter uses Alpha Strike, it gets an additional +2 attack and does not deplete. So all of a sudden, this rifleman is now doing it's a 1/7. It's doing 1 damage. It's getting +1 if the Alpha Strike option is used, and the sharpshooter is giving an additional 2, making a total of 4. And if it overheats, it can do 7. So that's quite powerful. And when we look at our Grendel, a 1/6/2, that's enough to kill it. Okay. So in this scenario, I'm just going to move the Hankyu Prime out. And the rifleman is going to attack, and so is the Locust. And the idea here is that the rifleman is going to attack, and it's going to deal all of its damage to this Grendel. And none of the damage that's going to be returned from the Grendel to the rifleman is going to hit the Locust, and the Locust is going to untap for the next turn, ready to block this Hankyu again, regardless of whether there's an overrun or whatever. So everyone's at tactics. Everyone has +1 initiative. The attack is declared. The block is declared. And at this point, the Grendel player, the clan player, plays or uses the option to jump. And this jump option gives the Grendel -1 attack, but it gives it +1 initiative, which means that the attacking player on 1 initiative is lower than the defending player on 2, must declare first. Okay, so our rifleman with the sharpshooter that's doing 7 damage is going to declare an overrun. Okay, and he also assigns the 1 damage from the Locust to the Grendel. Grendel is going to die horribly at this point. And therefore, the clan player, who has now 2 initiative, can play 2 cards if they so wish, decides to play a Heavy Fog. All mechs receive 2 damage. All mechs deal 2 less damage and receive 2 less damage. And basically what happens is, because of this reduction in the damage values, the Locust deals nothing. The Rifleman deals 1 plus another 1 for the Alpha Strike plus 2 for the Sharpshooter to 4. If they overheat, that gets to 7. But our Grendel receives 2 less damage on that and only receives 5 damage, and it has an armor structure value of 1 and 6. Therefore, it takes 4 damage. We can deal the damage on that, can't we? Where's the damage? 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 because he bounces off the armor. And then the amount returned, this used overheat and damaged it, so this takes 6 plus 1 from the base attack, because we jumped, we got -1 attack. So it takes 7 back, less its armor, etc, etc. So in this case, the Grendel survives and the overrun fizzles because the blocking units stayed on the field. Okay, they were not scrapped. And the problem with overrun is thus that any unit that reduces damage or prevents damage or has an effect to cancel a battle, and we'll have a quick look at those in a minute, really does mess with overrun. And defensive missions are reasonably common because they're reasonably useful. I did a quick search through Lackey looking at plus armor and preventing damage, and there are more cards. But I looked for plus armor and preventing damage in the text field, and I came up with an absolute raft of them. There are about 30 cards in here. Okay, they're all different variations. There's heavy fog, there's temporary ceasefire, even the Starleaf Proving Grounds gives you +1 armor, and therefore it can prevent an overrun. Things like defensive formation, fire from cover, even Look of the Fox can do it, kind of thing. Risky combat jump being a great one. I included terrains because with falsified maps you can pull those in and just drop those down and pick whatever you want from whatever you've got, basically. Things like Hansi Davin's Legacy and Mask. All of these cards, and it's a simple search, I haven't gone and trawled through everything, and I'm sure there's a few more, can prevent overrun. So from that perspective, overrun is great when you have chump blocking or speed blocking and you can kill everything, but that relies on you killing everything, okay? And it can easily be thwarted by defensive missions. And on top of that, it can also be thwarted by other effects. So I'm going to remove the heavy fog and put it back in my hand. I'm going to remove all the damage from here with the repair option. Come on. And we'll look at this again. This time, I'm going to include the Hankyu Prime. Okay, so just a quick recap. We have our Rifleman, 171, Alpha 1, Overheat 3, +3, with a Sharpshooter on it, doing a potential 7 if it overheats. And we'll just move the Overrun out of the way. We've got a 0-3 Locust, which is doing 1 damage. Okay. Our Grendel C, 162, Alpha 1 with jump, and an Inferno Missile retrofit, which we know is enough to kill the Rifleman if it overheats. And the Hankyu Prime, which now has ECM on it. And the thing here is that the ECM boosts the armor of a Grendel C by 1, which means the Rifleman in itself is not enough to kill the Grendel C. We need the additional damage from the Locust to take the Grendel C off the field. And now as the Hankyu Prime is in play, that's not going to happen. So you've got to be sure that you can kill everything. Okay, so ECM on a mech will also screw up Overrun. If you get your numbers wrong, it can get screwed up by ECM. So that's another example where Overrun fails. I'll just untap our Hankyu Prime and put it out of the way again, and we'll just look at the scenario where our 2 attacking inner sphere mechs are going for the stockpile and the Grendel blocks. Okay, no ECM this time. There is enough damage from the Rifleman and the Locust to kill the Grendel. Okay, so in this case, we can do quite a nasty play. And the nasty play is to split the Grendel damage, potentially. Are we going to split this? Yeah, we're going to split this. Yeah. Okay, so Rifleman comes in with the Sharpshooter on it, Locust on top, and the opposing player... Actually, that's wrong. We haven't jumped, so the clan player must declare their mission first. And they play a nasty little mission. Come on, I'm not sure what's going on here. I can't drag that. Called Disruptive Supply Lines. Play only during battle. At the end of battle, deplete all opposing mechs with Alpha Strike. So, what happens here? The Rifleman is going to get depleted. It has Alpha Strike. The Locust is not going to get depleted. It doesn't have Alpha Strike. Okay? The Sharpshooter prevents depletion when the Alpha Strike option on the Rifleman is used. It does not prevent the effects of disrupted supply lines. Okay? So, the clan player Alpha Strikes the Grendel because he knows it's going to die to the Rifleman, and allocates the 2 damage and the Alpha Strike +1 to the Locust. So that's 3 damage to the Locust. The Locust is going to die. Okay. The Rifleman or the bonus damage from the Inferno Missile retrofit is allocated to the Rifleman, which now takes 6 less 1 armor. It now has, 5 damage on it. Okay, and it's depleted. Okay, the damage from the Rifleman and the Locust scraps the Grendel. Okay, Overrun fizzles. Well, in fact, the Locust untaps because the blockers were destroyed. Okay, and if the Locust player or the Inner Sphere player decides to go for the Scrap Heap again, the Hankyu can come in and block. Okay, this is where it gets mean because I've given both sides Overrun. Okay, the turn ends. Clan player plays whatever. We'll just ignore that for the moment. The Rifleman is depleted, which means it cannot fight back. Therefore, the Hankyu Prime attacks the Rifleman. Our Locust chump blocks like last time. Overrun is played. The Locust is scrapped, and the Hankyu untaps and then hits the Rifleman for 3, which is more than enough, 1, 7, 3, to scrap the Rifleman and the Sharpshooter. Okay, so yes, there is power in Overrun. However, there are a number of things that can destroy it. It has to be played wisely. It assumes that everything is going to die, and all you need is a mech with an ECM on it, or one of those defensive mission cards, which pop up an awful lot, or some of the other things that happen, like terrains. And probably terrains are one of the more bigger reasons these days to stop people playing Overrun. It's unreliable and requires a specific set of conditions. When you play against newish players, they will not be aware of the chump blocking aspect of the game. And I'll just put a few things back out again. If we go back to the situation where the stockpile was attacked by the Hankyu and the Locust sacrificed itself, and then Overrun was played, and this is untapped because Overrun's been played, I now have mech advantage. I have 2 units on the table. Both are fast. My opponent has 1 unit on the table, which is slow. I have advantage. He cannot stop me dealing whatever I'm dealing to the stockpile, which is 2 from the Grendel plus the AP from the Inferno Missile retrofit and another 3 from the Hankyu Prime. So he cannot prevent that 6 damage. You might say, okay, fine, yeah, but next turn I'm going to smack you for 7. Okay, cool. But I can still hunt this mech, and I can hunt it with an ECM. If I hunt it, it cannot be killed because the ECM prevents that final 1 damage off my Grendel. So I can then go and destroy this, and all of a sudden now I have advantage. I have more mechs than you by a long way. And board presence is very, very important. So what a lot of new players struggle with or don't understand is board presence and having units on board, and therefore they are quite happy to sacrifice whatever it is, your little Locust in this case, to ensure the survival of whatever they're building, if it's a CUC, or their precious stockpile, which, you know, taking 3, okay, it's 3, it's an amount, but it's not the end of the world. Okay, so they get worried about that, and all of a sudden, if you've got a couple of overruns, it's very, very easy to achieve board advantage, presence, dominance, whatever you want to call it, with people that play that way. When you get to the experienced player level, shall we say, people are aware of that, and they will not speed bump unless they absolutely have to. And that normally means if I don't speed bump, it's end of game. And to be honest, if they do speed bump, without overrun, you're probably going to kill them the next turn anyway. If they speed bump, then it's going to die. Okay, fine. Your mechs are tapped out. Next turn, the whole lot's coming back again from you. And if they haven't got an answer, which they've got a turn to find an answer, and if we're looking at the difference between 4 mechs on the table versus 1, then okay, you're not. It's not going to make any difference. You know, the benefit of Overrun there is finishing the game a turn earlier. And finally, the other reason that Overrun is not great is what happens if I've got 4 mechs and I attack individually. Overrun tends to telegraph itself because you need to ensure that all of the blockers die, and that normally means you need to attack with more than 1, probably 3 or 4 in some cases, units. And when people do that, it sends a signal that says, I'm going to do something. There is a reason I am sending all of these over in one go. If you think about something like, where are we? Where's my scrap heap again? Oh, it's not there. Heavy fog, it affects all units. So what a lot of people will do is they will attack singly. So the heavy fog player only affects 1 unit. Next turn, or next attack, next mission, they attack with another unit. So heavy fog's effect, for example, is reduced to only 1 mission. So, you know, if someone comes across with 4 units, you're thinking something's on here. If it's in a sphere, you're probably thinking, oh, it might be final push or something like that. If it's clan, then invariably you're thinking it's Overrun. So Overrun is also readable. You can see when it happens. And here's an actual example. And I can speak for this because I was actually one of the players. This was the first, well, it was the first tournament I ever ran in or ever played in. And it was the second game of the tournament. It was the British Nationals in 98. And I was playing a fast wolf deck, i.e. fast mechs, that was actually slower than it needed to be. It needed to be a lot quicker, and I freely admit that, and that was bad deck design on mine. And I was playing a guy called Rob Matthews, who then went on actually that year to win the tournament. And he was playing a overheat Inner Sphere Davian deck with a lots of redline pilots. I think there were 5 redline pilots in there, as well as Kai and Victor and the O'Bannon sisters and a few other things. And the first game, he beat me. And he beat me in the last 2 turns, once with a forged mission order and once with an overrun, I think, if I remember rightly. Or going into game 2, I knew there was 1, probably 2 overruns in his deck and at least a forged mission order. And when you actually see the deck list, those are the only 2 missions he ran. So I knew I was slightly outgunned because he was turning out, if I remember rightly, it was that big Banshee. He managed to get one of these on the table, the 395s, overheat 4+3. So he's doing 8, and I think he got Kai on there. It was ridiculous. There's no way I got anything that could deal with it. So I had to find a mechanism of dealing with this, and literally I attacked his stockpile with everything I had, apart from a Fenris C, this lone little 2-cost chump blocker, a 161 missile 1. But fortunately, I'd sideboarded in a defensive card, and I'd sideboarded in Temporary Ceasefire, and I'd actually drawn 1 in my opening hand. And by the time his big attack of about 6 units was coming across the table, with that Banshee with Kai on it and Victor, and the O'Bannon sisters and a redline pilot on a couple of things like Whitworths and cheap overheat mechs, which was going to do about 40 damage or something stupid. And my little Fenris is there, and the pilot is absolutely shitting bricks all over the place because of what he's facing. I played Temporary Ceasefire and rolled a 5. And then the next turn he built some more stuff, and I attacked his stockpile with everything I had in order to get his cards down. And that Fenris that guy's got to have underwear of steel, because he was on his own again, and I played a temporary ceasefire again. And the following turn, the same happened, and I won. And I won because I threw everything at the stockpile, and I nullified the temporary ceasefire his big attack. And at the time, he showed me that he actually had 1 forged mission order and 2 overruns in his hand. And if he'd have split his force, he would have actually have beaten me. If he'd have put Kai and a couple of mechs in 1 attack and Victor and a couple of mechs in another attack and had 2 attacks, I could only block 1. He'd have won the game. But he was so fixated on either forged mission ordering my Fenris and giving me an OTK, a 1-turn kill with a big number, or the Fenris dying and him going overrun and killing me again, that he didn't think of it. And in the meantime, I managed to beat him. And the game ended up 1-1. And literally, it was such an intense match that we literally draw our opening hands, and it was time for because it was an hour and 10 minutes for 3 games. But that's how Overrun can be a good card for new players. Yes. A good card to learn about jump blocking. Yes. A good card to learn about jump blocking. Yes. A bad card because any defensive mission will screw it. Bad card because any ECM will screw it, or any terrains or enhancements will mess it up. Your maths has got to be right. And secondly, if you get fixated on it, you lose focus of where you are. And you, as I said, finally, it's a bad card because people will play around it. People will assume that you've had it. They will either block and kill or not block, and therefore Overrun is made redundant. So those are my thoughts on Overrun. A good card to learn about. An interesting card to play with at the start of your career or as you're learning the game. But as you go forward, a card that you want to slowly, if you've got it in your deck, that is, slowly phase out, because there are better cards with more utility and more use. And I would suggest to you that you shouldn't rely on it because it has a specific set of conditions attached to it, and they can be hard. If you're losing the game, Overrun is not going to save you in the slightest. So think about something that can. Okay, there we go. There's my thoughts on Overrun. Let me know if you want another card reviewed. Happy to do that. Let me know if you totally disagree with the wonderful comments I've made here. Links, as always, in the chat, or I'm on the Facebook page. Go join if you're not joined, or use the Discord server and contact whoever it is and get some feedback. If you want a card done, we'll do it again. We are ever trying to be your servant. So on those lines, I will wish you a very good rest of your day, evening, whatever, and tell you all to stay safe and look after yourself. And I'll see you soon.